sort of setting up and helping with the garden parties at Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace, and that's where I was convicted of fraud for £47,600. Well, it can't be that bad because we're only £3,000 in debt. We've only got £3,000 of loans. Little did she know that we're close to bankruptcy with £30,000 in debt. So even to the point of playing poker in metal huts in Sierra Leone, where we were told don't go off the beaten track, and I've asked the taxi driver, where can I gamble? That night in itself proves it's not about money, because however much I won that night, I wasn't going to be allowed to walk out with it. Within 5 months, I had taken £198,000. Again, police forensic accounting will tell you £206,000 was deposited. I'll win enough today, I'll pay them back and I'll walk away. These are guys with shotguns in their kitchen. There's pigs on the farm, there's an incinerator down there. How are you going to walk into somebody and say, by the way, I've stolen 100 grand off you, but there it is? And so, of course, I'm in the position where I'm going back to prison, and I genuinely couldn't. It's not the living conditions. It's not a holiday camp like people say it is.
Today's video is brought to you by Gamban, protecting people from online gambling harm. Today's guest was gambling before most kids even know what gambling is. Andy Galley lived with addiction for over 3 decades through military life, family breakdown and prison cells. Today, he's using his past to stop others from having to go through what he went through. Andy Galley, welcome to the Addicted Recovery Show.
Good to see you, Dan. Good to see you.
Cheers, mate. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I want to get straight into it. I like to ask my guests off the bat, if I ask you to think of your most powerful gambling memory, what comes to mind?
I think it's one of those kind of memories that people always go to because it's a large amount of money. But I think I won £127,000 one night. And by 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd lost it all. So that night was the range of emotions, I think, and the highs, the lows, absolutely encapsulates gambling on a whole. Do you know what I mean? From that massive high, life is sorted, we're all good, family life's going to be great, to just not wanting to be around anymore, all within the space of 5 or 6 hours.
How far into your addiction, how many years into your addiction did that happen?
So I was 27, so it probably 18 years, 17, 18 years, because I started gambling, as we said, very young. So I knew exactly the pattern, what's going to happen. You've seen it before with different amounts of money, but just that life-changing money, I think was a crippler, really.
Just take me from that moment of that win, how you won it, that euphoria that you described, into 5 hours later when it's all gone. Just talk me through, for somebody who doesn't gamble, talk us through that process of that range of emotions.
Yeah, so I hadn't been playing on massively high stakes. I didn't have loads of money in the bank at the time, so it was quite low stakes on the slot machines, online slots. It was 32 red, and I was just sat playing, wasn't expecting to win, but I was just, as I always did, it was really to kill time, to cure the boredom. You don't even think it's going to happen. You might win a couple £100. And all of a sudden it was a progressive jackpot. So within the feature opened up, and all of a sudden it come up that you've won the mega jackpot, progressive of just over £127,000. Everything goes through your head. It's not real. It won't happen. All these, it's not going to happen. And then when it's actually in your balance, and the first thing I done was went straight to the withdrawal page, and I wanted to withdraw every penny. You don't even think I'll leave a couple £100 in, because that's me done now, apparently. I've had a big win. I'm just going to close the account down, take my money. And the delusional kind of thinking, that distorted thinking of that's me done. And it almost immediately I thought, well, how do I tell my wife? Because the biggest problem was that gambling had been an issue in our marriage from the very start. So already at this point, 8 or 9 years, plenty of, sort of domestic arguments. I suppose when you look at it, deflection from me, narcissistic behavior, hiding that addiction. So there was no way I could go up to her and say, I've just done this, I've just won all this amount of money. because the threat was that if you ever gamble again, you're out the next day. And so I thought I'll go to bed and tomorrow I'll tell her that I've won 5 numbers in the bonus ball on the lottery. So I come up with a scenario straight away because she was very accepting of the lottery still, as most people are. And so that was my plan. I went to bed and lay there tossing and turning, thinking about paying the debts off, buying a house, everything. Back then, married quarters were around 30 odd £1,000 per house, and they were selling them, military married quarters. So I could buy 2 houses. I could buy a car. I could pay the debts off. Life genuinely would have been very, very sorted. And so I got back up and I thought I'll deposit £200 because I need to play a little bit, just to calm my head down. Then I'll go back to bed. And back then you could reverse your withdrawal. And it said to me, why don't you reverse some of your withdrawal rather than deposit more? So I did. I deposited a few £100, and within, the space of minutes, I'm reversing 5,000, 10,000, 10,000. And even when you're at 100,000, there was a point where I stopped and thought, well, you're still £100,000 up. I'd only deposited £200 that day. But it's not, because in my mind, I'm £27,000 down. So if I just get back to the 127, then I'll stop again. And of course, what you're forgetting during all of this, or I didn't know during all of this, it wasn't about the money. It's about the buzz, the excitement, the dopamine. Every time I'm pressing that button, I'm getting that dopamine hit and getting that adrenaline rush. And of course, the bets get bigger and bigger and bigger. The reversals, then were £20,000, and I'm putting £2,500 a spin on roulette, because roulette is the one where I could win it all back in 1 or 2 spins. And yeah, literally within 3 hours, it had gone 3 o'clock in the morning. And I sat there, and I think you're just in disbelief at first. There's some anger, there's disbelief, there's sadness. And then you start looking around the house, and on our kitchen table was unpaid gas bill, unpaid water bill of about £600 with threats to cut our water off. The cupboards are half empty. So it's not just that loss, it's then all of that realization that kicks in of the mess you were in before you had that win. And all as a result of gambling. We didn't have flash cars, we didn't have flash holidays. And, you just, how do you get out of that? And who do you talk to? Because I couldn't talk to my wife. I'm in the military, so there's no way I'm going into the Navy the next day and saying, by the way, I'm suicidal, I've just done this. So you're completely on your own with those destructive thoughts of, I don't want to be here. Everybody would be better if I took myself out of this life. And that's where you are at 3 o'clock in the morning. But when your family get up at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, the mask goes on, the happy, the smile, I'm okay, morning all, you even kiss your wife goodbye before you go out the door, knowing that all you want to do is end your life. So, yeah.
Before you told me that story, I said, for somebody who doesn't gamble, talk us through it. As somebody who did have an addiction for 22 years, the same as yourself, I've just gone through that roller coaster with you. So I said it wrong. That was for people who do gamble. Just first of all, the win, I can't tell my wife about it. I've got to hide it. I'm not allowed to gamble. So you're coming up with that web of lies of the lottery, which is just the entire story of my gambling. Just lies, spider web of lies, having to remember the lies you've told, and just that chaos in your head of trying to remember them all. The gas bill, like you just said, you're doing £2,500 a spin. That means nothing to you. You happily press that button. Then you look at that gas bill, and £600 is massive. But when you're on the roulette wheel, £2,500 is nothing. It's insane. Like, I describe it as being intoxicated when we're doing it. The decisions that we make when we're in the midst of that, and just my heart sank when you described that moment of reversing a withdrawal, £200, £500, £2,500, £5,000. I completely related to that moment where I'll just put £200 in and see what happens. And then the deposits get bigger, or the withdrawal reversals get bigger. My heart sank in that moment because that just took me back to so many of my own memories. Thank you so much for sharing that. Just, I'm relating so much, and I feel so connected to you already, Andy. Take me back to the start. You said you started gambling at 9. How was that so early on?
Excuse me. So 9, And most people will say, well, that's ridiculous. You can't be, hooked at 9 years old. But obviously, having done a load of work on myself now, I can add a bit of insight as to how that or why that potentially happened. But we used to go to a local caravan park. Sounds really salubrious, I know. But basically, my in-law grandparents had a static caravan down there. That's where they lived. And we would go down and use the entertainment. So use the clubhouse. My mum and a long-term boyfriend would go into one side where there was music, entertainment, and the children would be in the other side with a pool table and things like that. So I was that what I would call annoying child, constantly going back to my mum and her boyfriend asking, when are we going? I'm bored. I'm bored. When are we going? So I'd play pool for a bit. That would occupy me for a bit, play football, do whatever. And it was one night my mum said, why don't you go and play the machines? And gave me a couple of pound. And off I went. And I played a Donkey Kong 2p machine with a £2 jackpot. And I stood there for hours. If you ask my mum now, she can remember that night. And I just stood there and I was happy. Like, I cannot say how happy I was. I was occupied all night, didn't even want to go home. But the key to that is the fact that there were no arguments. My mum was happy. My sisters were happy because they weren't being shouted at. Nobody was arguing. So when we look at what gambling gave a child that night, it wasn't just the money or the risk or the thrill. It was peace. It was quiet. It was just contentment that in the family home we never ever had. My mum had quite severe mental health problems herself, undiagnosed, and so it was quite a house full of turmoil, really. And to then have something that can give you peace and quiet and comfort, that's the best thing in the world. And I wanted more of it. And of course, the caravan park closed as they do in winter, September, October time. And then I found the arcades in the town. Lived in a seaside town in Cornwall, Falmouth, and there was an arcade at the beach. There was 3 arcades in the town, and I found one that was quite hidden, quite dark. If I think back to it now, you walked in down a few steps, and it was almost like cavernous. It was warm, it was safe, it was fun, it was happy, and some of my friends are in there, so that's completely normal. And I would just go in there, even if I had no money, I would stand and watch people for hours. I would hope that there was, going to get some money from somewhere. Someone would win and give me a pound. And as soon as I didn't, and I didn't have money, but I wanted to play, was when I started stealing from my mum's purse. And she also had a big whiskey bottle in the front room that was full of 2p's, 5, 10, and some pound coins. And she would tape heavily around the top of this bottle because she knew what I was doing. And I would take all the tape off, tip all of the money out. It would take about an hour. And I would take about £5 or £6 coins and then strategically place them back around the bottle so that it looked as though I hadn't been in there, and then tape the bottle back up. So even at a young age of 10, 11, 12, you're highly manipulative. You could go and visit an auntie, a gran, and give them a sob story, come up with any excuse. And I would also steal from those family members. Every house I went into, if somebody left their purse lying around, I would, find some money. And I can remember one day, I think it was again one of my in-laws, and I took £5 out of my gran-in-law's purse. She's obviously got hold of my mum within minutes and said, I know I had a £5 note in there. Where is it? So as my mum's got hold of me, I'm trying to come up with every excuse under the sun. It wasn't me, it was someone else. So by the age of 13, all of these things had contributed to my mum then calling in Gamblers Anonymous. She had got hold of the local group, and they offered to send somebody around to come and have a chat with me. And I got home from school, excuse me, and there was a lady sat on the sofa, and my mum said, this lady's come from Gamblers Anonymous. You've got a gambling problem. She's going to help you. And I just went off on one, absolutely lost the plot. And I walked out the house straight down to the arcade. So I think even at that age, I knew it was a problem. Of course you do. you know.
Mhm.
But you keep thinking, I'll just stop when I want to. And this carried on really 14, 15, in the arcade every day. I was a county cricketer who then just gave up cricket completely. Sort of, I was a straight A student, or the ability to, and ended up getting C's and D's, because I was just neglecting absolutely anything. And I was working in a local hotel, doing pots and pans after school, earning some money. And that was funding me enough to go and gamble quite heavily, really. £70 a week back in 94, 95, was a decent amount of money. And this carried on 16, sort of, I can remember being in the arcade, and it was my French exam was coming up, French oral exam, and I was losing, and there was no way I was leaving that arcade. And you're having that back and forth with yourself, going, it's an exam, you've got to go. No way was I leaving that machine. And it was the same as if I was winning. If I'm on a winning streak, there's no way I'm leaving that machine, because somebody else will jump on it. And so I ended up missing a couple of GCSEs even. Um, sort of going back into that work, the manager or the owner then said, do you want to do a bit of portering? Brilliant. There's extra money there in tips, and the coach driver would give you money. And everybody was looking after me and being really nice to me. And then he said, why can you cover a shift on the bar for me? I'm 16, 17 years old, about 6 foot tall. And back then was very different, and I did. And what I noticed was people ordering 40 or £50 rounds of drinks, especially at a wedding or a bigger function. And they were big old antique tills. So I then thought, well, if I just open the drawer, put the money in, then that till owes me £30, £40, whatever the round of drinks was. And that soon escalated within about a year, 6 months to a year, to taking £300 to £400 a night some nights. And what I remember is on a Sunday is the arcades were closed, because it was very old school back then. Again, Sundays, everything shuts. That's it. And the anger that I would feel, and the frustration at not being able to gamble, not being able to spend that money on gambling, was ridiculous. My moods on a Sunday were through the floor. And it's still very much the same to this day. I hate Sundays. Absolutely hate the quiet, the boredom, and I think that is a very much a legacy from those times.
If you want to quit gambling, one of the strongest things you can do is remove access completely, and Gamban does exactly that, blocking gambling websites, apps, and betting platforms across every single device you use. They've been around for over a decade and recently passed 1 million downloads. And I'm genuinely thankful that Gamban has come on as Addicted Recovery's first ever sponsor. It means a lot to me and to this community, so if you're ready to protect yourself, visit the link below or hit gamban.com and download Gamban today.
And Monday I'd be straight into the arcade. I'll do an hour, then I'll go to college, and then I'll maybe go back at lunchtime. And it wouldn't. Most days would be in there for 6-7 hours, coming up to the time I had to go to work. The only reason that I go to work is because that's where I get the rest of the money from, So, but even that was a really difficult thing to come out of the arcade. So around, 17, 18, I met my first real partner. And I thought, I need more out of life. Cornwall's very much hospitality, seasonal work. And I went to the job centre to have a look at what was available. And there were 3 cards there: the Army, Navy, and RAF. Back then, the job centre, there was just cards all over the wall with different jobs on them. But I seen these, and I just went Navy. That will do. It very, very impulsive. Everything in life is impulsive, and the fact I could read and write meant that I couldn't join the army. So Navy was the obvious choice, and I just went straight to the careers office. And by May '98, I had my joining update, and I joined HMS Rally. So if my gambling was already a massive problem, joining the Navy is where it really escalated even further. And I can pinpoint, maybe a little bit of an ego boost, because I'm now in the forces. I'm in the Navy. I've got a salary for the first time. I'm not hourly paid anymore. You've got the banter, the camaraderie, but also a culture of drinking, risk taking. you're encouraged to push yourself outside your comfort zone at every opportunity. And as we were shown around the HMS Rally, there was an automat, which like a big cafe style area next to the shop. And there must have been 40 or 50 fruit machines in this automat. I can still picture it to this day. And there's 2 or 3 people at every single machine. They're laughing, they're joking, they're cheering. There's money coming out. And I just went, hang on, I've just been told what I do is wrong for 9 years. But all these people are in their 20s, 30s, from all over the country. This is completely normal. I genuinely thought everybody in Cornwall was wrong. They're a little bit backwards. And what I'm doing is completely right. And that is a genuine, you do, nothing hits Cornwall. Everything stops at the Tamar Bridge. When you're younger, it's even more evident that even new chocolate bars coming out, they just don't reach Cornwall. So I think everything played a part in that kind of thing. And first payday, bang, straight in there. First opportunity I got, supposed to be over ironing my kit, prepping for the next day. And I just wanted to go over there. I would get debriefs off my divisional officer because, where have you been? And you would make up all these excuses even in there, risking during your training, your basic training. And, it just continued. And if anything, escalated. And within week 1 or 2 of training, you got a brief from Lloyds Bank, who actually had a branch at HMS Rally. So the ladies would come down and they would explain to you that you can take a credit card, you could take loans, flexi loans, because you've just signed a 22-year government contract. You are the most secure people in the country, because if we missed a payment, they also had a system set up with the unit personnel office that they would get involved and make sure that that payment was brought up to date. So Lloyds Bank would lend you whatever you wanted, which led to the fact that by the age of 23, I am £30,000 in debt, 2 young children. And I think this is where I really highlight kind of the link to domestic abuse. I talk a lot about it because it's not something that we talk about enough. It's intrinsically linked with gambling. And it's all of my behavior at this time, not a part of it was physical. It's all mental. It's all, as I say, that deflection, the gaslighting, the narcissistic traits, but also the financial abuse, because every one of those debt letters was going to HMS Coventry, HMS Cumberland, HMS Drake, because my wife didn't have a clue about 90% of our debt. So although she knew my gambling was horrendous and it caused a lot of problems, she also thought, well, it can't be that bad because we're only £3,000 in debt. We've only got £3,000 of loans. Little did she know that we're close to bankruptcy with £30,000 of debt and no way out of it. So can I imagine living with a partner, not knowing our financial situation, who is, going off the handle at the slightest little thing? I've not even done anything wrong and he's in a foul mood. I used to go out in the morning, I've got money in my pocket or in the bank, I'm happy. So I'd kiss her goodbye, say bye to the kids, but I'd lose that money during the day. So the person walking back in that house at 5 o'clock at night is a completely different version, and that person's done nothing to warrant that. So if I think about it today, if my partner went out of the house this morning and she's gone out happy, she comes back in a foul mood, things are being hidden, lies are being told, I know things are going on. Where does that leave me? I'm treading on eggshells, so I can see now that unfortunately for the next 20 years, I was effectively a domestic abuser. We look at coercive control, by the lies we tell, we are coercive controlling, so it needs to be addressed. And I think sometimes, we don't talk about the uncomfortable within recovery or within gambling. But actually, I think that is the darker side, that some people would say it's crass that I talk about it because I was a perpetrator. But who better to learn from than the person whose mindset was going through that? For our children, our young boys to learn from somebody who's done it and can tell them what that actually entails. So anyway, sorry, I went off on a tangent, but this was the home life, for all of us really. And there's one instant in particular that I can remember I won. It was around £10,000 over the period of about a week. I just had cash. I'm sure there's other people, whether you've done it yourself, but I would every day, it seemed as though I was going to the bookies and winning another 1 or 2 grand. And I'm like, this money's just piling in. I'm walking around with 10 grand in cash in my pocket, and it's as if I couldn't lose. And what I've done is I've brought my children everything that was, there at the time. So laptops, pads, whatever was sort of up there at the time. And the following day, I've lost it all. I've been up on the fob tees, the fixed odd betting terminals, and I've lost it all. I've stood there all day. I've taken out a credit card with HSBC Bank. And of course, my wife has found out about that. So on getting home, a massive argument has ensued. Where has all that money gone? I know where it's gone. And we're really, really arguing loud. And I didn't know at the time, but my children were upstairs packing back away everything that I had bought them because they felt that they had been selfish, that dad has spent all his money on us and now mum's having a go at him for it. So not only was I almost getting away with that with my children, they're now also blaming mum because she's being unreasonable, because they can't comprehend at those ages what dad's done, that he's lost everything. And when I hear that from them now, and that still affects my son to this day, because if I ever offer him anything, I've offered to help him with a car before. No, I'll do it myself. And it's an instant, short, sharp, no, I'll do it myself. And when this is how the conversation come about, because he said, it's because I'm selfish. I said, what do you mean? And he said, do you not remember calling me selfish? And of course I don't. It's one in thousands of other things that I've probably said and shouted and done without thought of consequence. And that still affects him to this day. So those legacy harms are huge. It affects all my children to this day. And so this carried on, really. I've ended up with 3 young children, managing it somehow, getting from payday to payday, doing whatever I had to do. And I've spent 13 years in the Navy. I visited 63 countries, and I gambled in all but 3 of them. And that was only because it was Salala, Muscat during Ramadan, and in those countries where it is completely forbidden. And I couldn't find an underground poker game, as I could in most countries. So even to the point of playing poker in metal huts in Sierra Leone, where we were told, don't go off the beaten track, stay within groups, just go to these pubs. And I've asked the taxi driver, where can I gamble? And he's taken me off to this local gambling den almost. Now, when people say it's about money, that night in itself proves it's not about money, because however much I won that night, I wasn't going to be allowed to walk out with it. I knew that whilst we were playing. But it's the adrenaline, it's the buzz, it's the dopamine yet again, because otherwise I wouldn't have done it. It's that risk taking, the impulse, everything that plays a part. And really, when I look back at my naval career, I was really, really fortunate. I had my officer's papers raised on HMS Endurance, only to have them ripped up by the logistics officer the following day, because I had been in the mess. We were playing poker all day, drinking all day from 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. We're only supposed to have 2 cans of beer at sea. That was supposed to be your allowance. And being the beer bosun, we used to have big stocks of beer, and I'd been on it all day. And by 2 o'clock that morning in Antarctica, it's bright sunshine. So I've gone up to go for a cigarette, and my divisional officer, who was doing midnight rounds, has told me to go to bed. And no chance. This has gone on for about half an hour of back and forth of me telling him and calling him, and he was trying to do what he could to help me. The following day, it's all hit the fan, and my petty officer writer come down, told me that the logistics officer wanted to see me, and all of a sudden it's all come flooding back. And she said, Andy, you've got the most potential in the world on board this ship. You're absolutely amazing, but give you a drink or you're in your gambling mode and you are absolutely horrendous. And she just ripped them up in front of me. And, that summed my life up in general, really, which is you've got potential, you're good at what you do, but you will always press that effort button. And normally it's because of the feelings that are, coming from gambling, the guilt, the shame, the everything that comes with it. So what do you do to deal with those uncomfortable feelings? You go and gamble again, because I forget about it all then.
Mhm.
So this has been a pattern right throughout life. And I decided HMS Endurance almost sank in the Magellan Straits, Christmas 2009. And I think I kind of made that decision at that point that, okay, I'm going to leave. That was close. I'm going to leave. I'm going to be a good dad. I'm going to be a great husband. I'm going to get a normal job, and I'm going to change my life around completely. So I blame the forces for everything. That's why I gamble. That's why I take risks. So if I leave the Navy, I can change everything. And again, what you don't realize is all you're doing is changing your environment. And there's a lot of people that do that is they keep changing big things. They change where they live, they change their job, they change whatever, all in the hope that that will be what triggers them to grow up and not gamble. That's what I always thought, was I need to grow up and then I'll stop gambling. And it didn't. Leaving the forces, I had now lost my sense of purpose, sense of identity. I just waking up the next morning, you haven't got the camaraderie, the banter, the people around you, your support network. All of a sudden you've lost everything. And if gambling ever needed any more, it now had me completely, because that was my only out. And I was fortunate. I got a job at a local rugby club. I worked there for 2.5 years. Absolutely loved the sport. Absolutely loved it. But with that come, the environment again, the banter, the drinking, the risk taking. I was down in the local bookies from eight till 4 some days, and then going back to work or to the club at 5 o'clock at night when all the volunteers turned up. You then have your executive meetings, and then we'll have a pint after the meeting, which turned into, I don't know, being woken up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning by the Lithuanian cleaning family who used to come in and clean the rugby club, and they would shake me, Andy, you okay? And oh, geez, I'm a father of 3 children. It's absolutely abhorrent behaviour right the way around. So, but the reason I always look and think actually alcohol was a massive comorbidity and potentially an addiction in itself was because I needed £2,000 or £3,000 to fulfil my tolerance for gambling. There's no point going into a bookies with less than £1,000 in my pocket. So if I had no money, I could always find £20 to buy some cheap alcohol with, or I could go behind the bar and get some alcohol. But I couldn't find a grand to go and gamble with. So alcohol would become that sustaining kind of feature. When I couldn't gamble, I need something, and it was always alcohol. The problem being, whenever I drank alcohol after a loss, I am the angriest person in the world. And everything that I've been suppressing in the last months now all comes flooding out when I'm drunk and somebody says that wrong thing. If I drink after a win, I'm fine. I'm laughing, I'm joking, everybody thinks what a lovely guy. And that is the biggest problem, is people know you when you're at your best. They know that nice person. So when you are the bad person, they make allowances for that. There are no consequences because people will let you off because you're that nice guy. So it's how we even manipulate that situation around to make sure that people will always protect us when we're called out. Um, I think if my wife had told anybody, they would have gone, "No, not Andy. He's a nice guy. It must be her. She must be a nightmare," because that's the environment that I had created. And my first marriage finally come to an end in September 2013, and I literally went out that night. I went to my mum's, got changed. I think she ironed me a shirt, and I went out drinking. And at 10 o'clock that night, I can remember somebody turned around from the bar, asked me to carry some drinks, and I went and sat with her. Excuse me. And I sat with her all night. Name was Vic. And literally from a 15-year marriage, I met my second wife that very night at around 10 o'clock. And there was yet again There was no thought of the consequences. There was no thought for my children, no thought for my ex-wife, no thought for anything else other than that impulse, the excitement going on, and the selfishness, And I told her that I'd been split up for around 6 months. I told her I had 2 children, not 3 children, because I thought that would make a difference. And literally within a couple of weeks, I'd moved into a house. And along with that come sort of that want to be out of Cornwall. She wasn't from Cornwall herself, she was from Hartlepool. And I said, okay, let's have a look for jobs in London. I did, and that's how I ended up working for the Not Forgotten Association. Within that role, that included then sort of setting up and helping with the garden parties at Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace, and that's where I was convicted of fraud for £47,600. Now, the backstory within that one is I moved up when I got the job. I moved on my own whilst we waited for the children to finish school, and then my wife would move up in June when they broke up for July when they broke up for school. And I'm in a flat in Queen's Park on my own, well-paid job. It was quite a salubrious job, really. It's, all of a sudden you're stood in Buckingham Palace, you're stood in St James's Palace. You're mixing with people that you would never, ever believe you would mix with. And nothing could come close to what gambling gave me. So all I wanted to do, I can remember standing in Buckingham Palace Gardens one day, and all I wanted to do was get to the William Hill down at Victoria Station. And I've made my excuses, I've made other excuses, and off I've gone, and I'm stood down at Victoria Station in William Hill, just feeding the machine money again. And I would buy 2 bottles of wine on the way home. I would buy junk food. Weight has always been an issue for me because everything's compulsive, but everything adds to that feeling. And it all really, I started raising. So I took the petty cash initially. Wasn't very petty. It was about £3,000. And there was one day I took £100. Then I took 200. I'll win 400. I'll pay it back. As you can probably, and most people listening to this will probably understand, is by the time I'm taking 1,500 to win 1,000, and I'll have 500 left over, and then I won't do it again. By the time the 3,000 has gone and somebody's needing petty cash, I'm in a panic. And when I thought about it, I had the administrator log on for the finances. I had the authority to authorize them and to release the payments. So I was raising an invoice, paying the invoice, changing the bank details on it, changing the bank details back. And then by that point, the money was in my bank. So I filled the petty cash back up. I've got some money in my bank. But what happens is I lose that money in my bank. I then look at the petty cash and I think that's hard work to go back and do that again. If I just raise one more big invoice or bigger invoice, I can have a big win, pay it all back, and I'll walk away. That's what I'll do, to the point that I didn't even know how much it was. When they asked me how much is it, I emailed them on the way in one morning and told them what I've been doing. And when they come back and said, look, how much is it? What is it? I said, I don't know, probably about 30,000. And it was 47,600, which I think was, probably low on my side, probably. But every single penny of that had gone into the bookies, whether that be online, whether that be in the bookies itself, plus my salary, plus, again, the rent was outstanding, the bills were unpaid. And you've got nothing. It's not as if I'm sat with a car that I can sell and a watch or it's madness. And I can remember at one stage I did buy a flash watch at Blue Water. It was around £10,000 for a Breitling watch. And within 2 weeks I had it listed on Gumtree for 2,500. The guys come around thinking it must be fake. It must be, you're full of it. And when I've showed him all the paperwork, it had the papers, the box, certificate. He just went, this is mad. And I said, and I told him then I'm a gambler. I'm an absolute gambling addict, and that's what I'm going to use it for. And he went, you're nuts. Gave me the money, and he was happy. £2,500 gone in a couple of hours. So even at those times, I think, right, I'll spend the money, I'll buy something big so that I cannot lose it back to them. That's my thought process. But you do, because I'll just sell that stuff. So anyway, I sort of obviously now facing prison, the police station, and I just gave them everything, told them everything. This police officer brought down 6 CDs with him, and he said, I've only used half a CD. He said, literally, I thought I was going to be here for hours, like trying to dig into it and trying to uncover things. He said, and you've just literally given me everything within half a CD's worth. He said, even when he stopped the interview, he said, I just can't believe this. He said, I've seen it or heard it before. He said, but not on that scale. He said, is this even possible? And then, of course, once they had done the forensic accounting and looked back through all my bank accounts, he said, I can't argue with you. Every penny has literally gone on gambling. So by the time I got to court, I couldn't afford legal aid, or I wasn't allowed legal aid because I'd earned too much. But I couldn't afford a solicitor because I had and lost it all. Sorry. So I'm there with no legal representation, no family backing. My wife wouldn't come to court with me. She was a chartered accountant, and working for the Building Society Association at the time. So you can imagine being associated with someone with a fraud conviction was also risking her career. Um, so luckily, I say luckily, the judge gave me a 2-year suspended sentence. I wrote him a letter, about 8 sides of A4 about what I'm going to do, why I've done what I've done. I'm going to sort my life out. I'm going to get help. I'm going to do all these wonderful things. And he gave me a chance. But looking at that, yet again, there was a lack of consequences that day because I thought I was going to prison. And actually, I've walked out of the front of the courthouse a free man, effectively, when you get a suspended sentence. So I think, you're not consciously going, oh, well, so what? That didn't happen. But in the back of your mind, the next time that you have a compulsion to gamble, that lack of consequence plays a part in whether you do or whether you don't. And I did. Within weeks, I was back gambling, and my second marriage broke down. And I think this is a good time, really. Sort of, I mentioned domestic abuse earlier and issues around childhood jealousy. I noticed in all of my relationships, massively insecure, massively jealous, and it was all driven from fear. And when I look back, my younger years, especially, my mum was absolutely brilliant as a single mum, amazing in so many areas. But one thing she was always quite promiscuous. So, if a man showed her attention, she had a long-term boyfriend. But I can always remember whenever she said, I'm going out for a drink with friends, I'll be home at 8, 9, 10 o'clock to tuck you in. And I would wait up all night excited. Mum would be home in a minute. Around midnight, I would hear her coming down the road, and then I would hear a different man's voice, whether that be a Geordie accent, a Scouse accent, because we had the docks just down the road. So, and I can remember the anger and the just frustration in me and sadness as a child because I thought mum's coming home to look after me, but she's chosen these men over me. So whenever into an adult relationship, when I have a partner saying I'm just going out for a drink with friends, my behaviour has already been quite shocking. So of course she's going to look for anybody out. Anybody's a better proposition than me, and she's going out for a drink with friends. And that fear it would look to the outside world as though I'm this massive controlling bully, don't want to go in anywhere. It's actually that 6-year-old child inside really fearful that that person's going to leave you. And I know that's hard for people possibly to understand and to, accept. But that is genuinely, I can see, I still to this day, I can be that scared child. So all of my second marriage was full of that kind of behavior, the gambling, the lying, the cheating, just absolutely everything again. So I've moved back to Cornwall. I've again met another partner very shortly afterwards, getting back down there. And I knew her from previous. And again, I took a job. I was, let's just say, not being truthful around money. And I was drinking heavily. So all of a sudden, I've said to my new partner, look, I can feel these things coming back. I need to get a grip on this. And we both went to counselling for around 9 weeks, couples counselling, talking about the jealousy, talking about all these things. And we went on a night out, And she said, we've been doing brilliant lately. Our life is amazing. It's really good. Let's have a drink. And even then, I knew, because I'm not doing the right things, I'm not in a good place, I shouldn't be having a drink. I did. And on the way back in the taxi, I believe my partner was flirting with a taxi driver. I've got out. I've gone for the taxi driver completely. My partner's come around. She's also been assaulted. And all of a sudden, I'm on a suspended sentence and now being arrested. And I woke up in the prison cell Saturday morning thinking I'm going to be told you were arrested to prevent breach of the peace. I'd been arrested for that before, to avoid anything happening, but it wasn't. And then they started telling me what and how and everything else. And I obviously I admitted to everything because I knew I was capable. I knew when I had a drink, absolutely I could. And I've ended up in Exeter prison, where I asked for help, only to be told gambling's a secondary addiction. We need to deal with your alcohol and your gambling will subside. And I'd never heard anything so ridiculous in my life. But that was a theme throughout a lot of people that I spoke to. Gambling's a secondary addiction. It's a secondary thing. Don't worry about your gambling. It's the alcohol. Yet my index offence was gambling related, was fraud. That was what the suspended was initially for. And I've ended up sort of I had another suicide attempt very shortly after, because the one way I relate it to now is almost like the post office scandal over here, where, everybody is told, well, it's only you, and you genuinely feel you are the only one. And that's how these people in power make you feel, that you are the only one. The reason that gambling is still so hidden, still so stigmatized, is because people keep getting told you're the only one. Not everybody has this problem. And so I think that's where I was. And I thought, I must be stupid. I knew I'm not thick, but I must be stupid if I'm the only one doing this and it's not a problem. And that's where I've come around from that suicide attempt, and I've decided to do a level 1, level 2 in counselling skills, through the Prison Officers Association, paid for one, and the Prison Education Trust paid for another one. And I was trying to understand why I do what I do. Why do I think the way that I do? And I think I said to you earlier, I started writing my life story down. I wanted something to do. And I thought, I've got all this time locked in a prison cell for 23 hours. And I started writing. And I covered my whole childhood. I started going on further than childhood. And it ended up being about 130,000 words, I think about 300 odd pages that I had handwritten just over that sentence. And I just thought I was fixed. I got out of prison going, right, I understand why I do what I do. I've done the counselling skills courses so I can help myself a bit more, and I'll be okay. And I met a new partner, told her everything, every gory detail. Luckily, she was willing to give me that chance. And I genuinely thought I was fixed. So it wasn't until lockdown happened, and all of a sudden I started playing the free spins that were still being emailed to me. And I didn't see a problem with that because I'm not risking any money. What I also hadn't realised was I gambled almost every single day in prison. But because it was for canteen for £2 or £3, that to me isn't gambling. That's not my thousands of pounds that I class gambling as. So I would get up first thing in the morning. The first thing I do is ask if anyone wants a game of poker. Who's got the matchsticks? Get the matchsticks out. We'll have a game of poker. Everybody puts in a can of tuna. And what I didn't realise still back then was I'm still getting that same escape. I'm still curing the boredom through using that. I'm still getting a dopamine hit when I win 30 quid's worth of canteen. I'm still getting everything that I got from the outside, but I wasn't classing it as gambling purely because of the monetary amount. And I think that's where, even when I tell my story and we talk these big figures, you need people to realise that even if you're losing £10 a week, but it's causing arguments in the home, it's causing you to, miss your work, miss whatever, the monetary amount is irrelevant. It is the fact of everything else, the harm that you're suffering away from that. You could be a millionaire, but if you're losing £100 a week and your wife is really upset about that, and actually you're losing time with the children, you're not taking part in things because you're checking your football bets, actually that's a problem. Just because you can afford to doesn't mean it's not a problem. So, and I think that's where I was, because I then bought a scratch card. I won £20. It doesn't sound a lot, but I was back on universal credit at this point in lockdown, and that £20 allowed me to buy a load of picnic things. And we've gone out and had the best day ever, because I've baked stuff. I was doing a bit of Mary Berry impression, and that £20 meant that we had that great day, not just the £20 that I won on a scratch card. So the next time I bought a £5 one, a £10 one, you win 50 quid. And then before long, you're back in the bookies with 10 or £20. And I am giving myself the most praise ever, because you've got this under control. Who would have thought you could walk into a bookies with 20 quid and walk back out? Look how amazing you're doing. And I can remember saying it to myself, and you just don't see it at all. And I hear a lot of people now say, oh no, I've got it right back under control. Brilliant if you can. I think it's, for me anyway, personally, it's too much of a risk. I can't do a thing. So I've done a level 4 diploma in addiction counselling. I approached Cloud's House to carry out my volunteer hours, and I went up and met some of the therapists and spent 2 days there. And they said, look, we'd like to offer you a job. We want to bring gambling into our work, and yeah, let's offer you that job. 3 hours later, I get an email and a phone call from the HR department saying we can't because of the assault charge. And it was withdrawn there and then on the spot. The therapist didn't even contact me. Nobody said anything. I know they would have felt awkward, but my life really come crashing down at that point, because if I can't even use my lived experience as I'm doing now, then what am I going to do? I've got a criminal record. I've got years and years of gambling addiction. And I took a job at a pig farm as farm secretary. Genuinely thought it would be admin work. That would be fine. I just need a normal job that pays normal money. And it's a theme again. I just want normal. I just want a quiet life. Just let me earn some money, pay my way in the home. That's all I wanted to do. And I can remember during the handover, the girl I was taking over from said, oh, and we raise payments at the end of the month. And I must admit, my heart sank, because I thought, I can't be in this. And she said, but it's fine, because the accountant comes in once a month. She does all the invoices, does the bank rec. We don't touch any of that. All we do is raise them. So I went, okay, all right, I'll be okay. Within 5 months, I had taken £198,000, just over. And with salary on top, with the selling of the car, anything I built back up a little bit, in probably 4 of those months, £200,000 of that was deposited. Again, police forensic accounting will tell you £206,000 was deposited. So there was nothing spent on anything else. There was no holidays, there was no watches, there's no clothes, there's no, it was purely every day, again, thinking, I'll win enough today, I'll pay them back and I'll walk away. I'll win enough today. There were days I won enough, and my little addict in my head would say, but how are you going to pay them back? These are guys with shotguns in their kitchen. They're pig farmers. There's pigs on the farm. There's an incinerator down there. How are you going to walk into somebody and say, by the way, I've stolen 100 grand off you, but there it is? So you then go, well, I'll win 200. I'll give them 150. So they're happy. And then ridiculous. And any excuse, any reason for me to keep gambling was what I was looking for. And so, of course, I'm in the position where I'm going back to prison, and I genuinely couldn't. It's not the living conditions. It's not a holiday camp like people say it is, but it's also not, that harsher conditions. We got a kettle, you got a bed, you got a telly, you got a desk. You're not living in a luxury lifestyle, but it's okay. But it's the monotony of it. It's again that losing who you are, that sense of purpose, sense of identity. I know you're supposed to have your liberty stripped, but to strip someone of their full identity, and you're no longer a use to anybody, you're just an offender, you're just a criminal. And hearing people talking about what drugs they're going to get that day, who's going to get weighed in, who's going to get stabbed, from minute one in the morning, you're just like, just let me out of here. That's what I couldn't cope with. And so I just thought, I can't go back. I'm just going to end it once and for all. And I've heard people say that, when they're talking about suicide or planning their suicide, that they become quite relaxed and happy. I'd never had that. But this day I really did. And I just felt the freest I've ever felt in my life, because I was finally going to take back control from gambling. I wouldn't have to live my life another day as a gambler. And I planned to drive into a truck on the A303. So drove to Cornwall, selfishly again, to tell my family what I had done, because they had always promised that if I ever done it again, I'd be out of their life. I'd be kicked out of their life. And they didn't. My mum, as always, will stand by, it's almost unconditional love. It's just a commitment to your children that she'll always be there. But it was my children who said, when you're good, you are absolutely amazing. We just need you to get help. Please get help. And I managed to drive back to Wiltshire, and I phoned Gordon Moody. And that's how I ended up in 14-week residential rehab. Guy called Dave Hollingsworth answered the phone on New Year's Eve, which if he hadn't, again, I was in a very, very dark place at that point. And I don't even think he realizes to this day just how important him being so dedicated to helping others on a New Year's Eve, it just really mattered. And I was given a space in February, and in I went. And I was stood outside of the recovery house thinking, I'm not going in there. Look at it, it's a dive. I don't need to go in there. I'll do it myself. I'll go to GA. I'll do this. And Kate, my partner, just went, that's fine. Put your bags back in the car. We'll head off. I said, yeah, come on. She went, but you can take those bags with you when you get home. And I went, right, okay. So she took me up to the door. It was like a child being taken to school for their first day. And, it genuinely was. And I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm angry. I've got like that angry kid face on, of don't want to do it. And Kev opened the door. He took Kate through, and all of a sudden it was a whirlwind. But Dave was taking Kate off for a coffee. I was being inducted, your bag searched, whatever. And I was there for all the wrong reasons. I was there to reduce my prison sentence, to save my relationship, to, appease my children. And it wasn't until about week 4 that I had a chat with John Garney, my therapist. And I would say a chat, it was a one-way chat from him, who honestly, he got me that day. Andy, you're just sitting there lying. And he could tell my lies. He could repeat my lies to me. He could pinpoint exactly where I was lying to him. And, clinically, probably he would be questioned over it, but he knew exactly what I needed. He said, I'll tell your family you've done brilliantly for 14 weeks, and you'll be this amazing, all singing, all dancing person. And in 6 months' time, you'll be 6 foot under. I guarantee you that. He said, but I'm going home at 5 o'clock. Dig out. I'm not bothered. And he just kind of closed the door. And it fired something in me to go, I'll show you. Kind of, it was, nobody's going to talk to me like that. And for some reason it twigged, and I picked the 12 steps up with him. I'm not a massive GA kind of religious person. And I think there's some of those religious connotations within GA that could be very off-putting for a lot of people. And I think the oldie worldy wording of it can be very off-putting, because even for someone like me, I've got a decent level of intelligence. Reading it, I couldn't exactly understand what they wanted me to delve into. But as soon as Johnny broke it down into plain English and explained to me, Andy, it just means they want you to look back at everything bad you've done, like sort of properly make amends for it and look into it deeper, I went, oh, I can do that. So the steps or the keys that I've now come up with, they're really, really important. I think it's a great thing to follow, and GA works for so many thousands of people. So I'll never, ever, I think everybody should have every opportunity to try whatever they need, whether that be hypnotherapy, whether that be whatever you want to try. Not everything is going to work the same for the same person. We all need different things. So GA has its place, but for me, Gordon Moody really, really nailed that down. And I can remember being told before I left that do not get complacent, do not get arrogant with this, because your addiction, gambling, has been out in the car park doing press ups and weight training for the last 14 weeks. He's stronger than he's ever been. So you might be stronger, but your addiction is also as strong. And, all they told me was, all we've given you is a foundation. But you think you've done this 14 weeks and I'm fixed and I'm done. You're at the very, very beginning of that journey. And all we've given you is the tools to enable you to build on that. And part of me was still, yeah, whatever, I'm fixed, I'm all right. But actually, it was, I would trust John and Dave's words at any time. And because they told me, I thought, okay, there might be something in this. And I think that's where I just started looking deeper and deeper into recovery, why I do what I do, just absolutely everything about life, really. It's so little about gambling. It's more so about that self-worth, the confidence, the self-esteem. Why is that lacking? And every time I do something wrong and push a boundary, I'm damaging that self-esteem. So of course I'm going to feel weaker against my addiction. So it was interesting for me that it was so little about gambling. It could have been any addiction. It could have been shopping. It could have been porn. It could have been whatever. I would have used something because of what I was running from and not wanting to deal with. So it's very easy to get fixated on the gambling and go, well, how do I stop gambling? That's fairly simple, the stopping gambling. How do you stop yourself wanting to go back to it through your low moods and your low self-esteem and everything else? That's the more difficult part. It really is. And I think once I understood that, then I think the one key for me throughout recovery has been I've had urges, I've had compulsions. I'm about 4 years in recovery now. And if I said to you I've never had an urge or a compulsion, I'd be the biggest liar in the world because I have had them. The thing that always will stop me is going, what does my life look like tomorrow morning? And that's the one key question for me is, my life tomorrow morning, my job would be gone, my partner would be gone, I would have nowhere to live, my children would certainly write me off this time. And all for what? To maybe go to a bookies to win 500 quid, that actually I don't need that £500. And even if I did, there's ways and means of talking to people and asking for help and asking for support. That gambling is only ever going to go one way, and that's 6 foot under or in a prison cell. So it is always that question you ask is just, what does my life look like tomorrow? If I don't gamble, it looks all right. Yeah, it might be a bit, people who say I'm in recovery and it's rosy and my life is great and I meditate every morning and I do yoga and, Pilates or whatever. Brilliant. If that works for you, again, that works. For me, it's not that because life is hard. Life for people who have never had an addiction is hard. There's a cost of living crisis. There's other issues, people dying, people, family members ill. We will be faced with, issues every day of the year in our life. It's if you add gambling on top of them, it's a far, far harder life to live, So it's I think it does come down to gratitude, I think. And even for yourself this morning, giving me this platform or, talking on here, it just always helps because you reflect on it and yeah, just be very, very open. I think people will say I'm probably a little bit too honest nowadays, but I don't think there's such thing. The brutal honesty, as I said to you at the very beginning, people are more than welcome to judge me. I've done enough things in my life that people have every right to judge for, and rightly so. The reason I share it like I do, and even last week or prior to Christmas, I delivered a talk in a prison where somebody then went, it's not so much the gambling, but when you talk about domestic, sort of, I've had to think and see, I've given my missus a slap before, but she did say that she deserved it, mind. Now, when you're having those conversations and you're able to get men like him to open up and see, their behaviours in the home, or you see, a guy yesterday, again, being arrested due to his gambling, theft from the army. And, and he's like, oh, I won't tell my wife yet. It's not fair to put it on her. And I said, the reason you won't tell your wife yet is because that keeps it open to you. As soon as you tell your wife, your bank card is probably restricted. You're asked where you're going. So you're not telling her to protect her. You're telling her to protect gambling. And he come back and went, shit, you're good at this, aren't you? And it's not. It's just we can call that a lie when you're. And I think that's where us using our lived experience and being able to call that kind of stuff out, that's where it's really, really powerful. I'm not here to be a clinician. What I'm here for is to get those people into a thought process and a mindset that they're open to therapeutic support. Because most people don't want to go straight into looking at childhood. They just want someone who gets it for the initial period. So, yeah, apologies. I went on a long time there, mate. But I thought I'd go over your hour and 10 minutes.
Do not apologize at all.
Yeah.
Wow, just what a story. Yeah, sit back, take a breath. I'm just going to speak to everyone watching before I ask the 700 questions I've got written down to you. But everyone watching, I love the question Andy's just proposed that he says helps him every day. Comment below and let me know, what would tomorrow morning look like for you if you were to go out and gamble today? Please. I love that question. I love just that I don't even know what to call it. I love that activity that you've got, Andy, that sort of that helps you calm those urges when they do arrive. I've run out of paper with my list, so it's going to be tough for me to read these because I've been writing smaller and smaller. But
Yeah.
the first bit, I was nodding along. My neck's killing me from nodding along with you. But you said when I went into rehab, I went there for all the wrong reasons. My best moments in rehab, the strongest memory I've got from rehab was about 4 days into my rehab. I was there for 3 weeks. There was a guy that come back in who'd been in 2 years previous and it wasn't gambling, it was alcohol, and he'd stayed sober for the 2 years. But it was what he said that resonated with me so much. I was sitting right at the front listening to him, and he said, there's 3 types of people in here. There's people who are in here to stay out of prison. There's people who are in here to please a loved one, to please someone else. And there's people who are in here who genuinely want to get sober. They're the people that are going to come out of this successful, and they're the people you should hang on to. And I was convinced that was me. I was like, yeah, I'm here to genuinely get sober. I was similar to yourself. Like I wasn't I wasn't kicking and screaming, but I got made to go. I went to keep my wife in my life. I got an ultimatum. I went to keep my kids in my life. I went to please my family, 17,000 kilometers away back in England. And similar to yourself, I come out of rehab. I felt like I'd taken a pill. I'm cured now. I don't have to do any of this recovery work. I've learned all about my self-esteem and all that. I don't need to do anything about it. And I didn't do anything. And 6 months later, I went back to it again. And then it clicked for me. Right, everything I've learned in there, I need to practice that on a daily basis. You said that your addiction's doing press-ups in the car park. I have it as there's a lion in the front seat with me. The lion's asleep in the front seat and I'm driving. If I start driving fast, if I start taking risks and driving a bit silly, I'm going to wake that lion up. If I turn the music up really loud, I'm going to wake that lion up and my life's going to be chaos again. If I can just enjoy the driving sensible level of the music, basically me doing a little bit of recovery work each day, I can maintain my recovery and keep my addiction asleep in that front seat. But yeah, similar to yourself, I came out of rehab and I was like, that's it. I've got it. I've got it all licked. I've got this sorted. And yeah, 6 months later, I went back there. But I loved you admitting I went there for the wrong reasons. I was convinced I was that third person. I wasn't. I was that second person. And then that relapse 6 months later made me realize I need to want this for myself. I need to want to get better. I've got so much written down. You spoke about you came out of the Navy. It's the Navy's fault I gamble. I'm coming out of the Navy. I'm changing jobs. I'm changing where I live. I've got someone very close to me that I can see is struggling with gambling. I constantly want their recovery for them more than they want it, and it just never works. He recently moved from Sydney to Melbourne to escape his addiction. He said, and I'm just going to pack up and relocate. 3 weeks later, I'm getting a phone call at 2:00 in the morning as he's walking home drunk from the casino. He's done his brains in again, and I'm on the phone to him for 45 minutes. It doesn't happen. You can't just change your surroundings. The inner work is what needs to be done. I do have a question for you. I think I know the answer. Was gambling the problem or the symptom?
Yeah, it was definitely. Let's be honest. Gambling was literally just a symptom. Well, I say that as I just explained just now. I think gambling, it could have been anything. It genuinely didn't matter what it was in life. I mentioned alcohol, I was never really keen on the after effects of alcohol. I never touched drugs because I come from Cornwall. And again, they weren't readily available, but also the Navy was zero tolerance. I think if I had grown up in a different area, maybe in London, maybe in Liverpool, maybe whatever, it could well have been drugs. I could be 6 foot under years ago because I would have overdone the drugs. It's the fact that gambling was the easiest hidden, and that's what I liked. I love the fact that it was hidden. Um, I could still dress okay, talk okay, look okay, and nobody would be able to call me out on it. If I turned up drunk, they were going to. So, you know, yeah, absolutely. It sounds stupid because I talk about gambling every day of the week because it is so dangerous, but it could also have been anything. I would have used something.
Funny there, you said I never touched drugs. The Navy had the zero tolerance policy. Earlier, you spoke of going to Sierra Leone in an underground hut for a poker tournament. I'm sure that had a zero tolerance policy, but you still did that.
Yeah.
If it was drugs
Yeah.
that you picked up instead of gambling, I'm sure that zero tolerance I was really struggling with that. Zero tolerance policy wouldn't have stopped you. So yeah, the compulsivity comes across. Everything, every single thing you spoke of, just reassured, just hit home. It was never about the money from the very start. When you said you were on those machines in the arcades, and if you were losing, you were unable to walk away. I need to get that money back. If you're winning, I'm not leaving. I'm on a winning streak. I'm going to win more. The only way to win is walk away with your winnings. And compulsive gamblers, we could never do it. You can see now, as you're telling the story, you can see it was never about the money. I think same as me, as you were in the addiction, convinced it was the money.
100%. Yeah, it was always about the money at the time, and most people now, they will start because it starts about the money for a lot of people because they will use gambling as maybe a tool at the minute to recoup Christmas money that they've overspent on or to get Christmas presents. There will be a lot of people that have just started on their journey right now, and they will always go back to say, well, of course it's about money because that's why I done it in the first place. It's not. It's once you do it for that first or second time that you go, wow, I love this. Like, and it kills hours. We're into January where it's a dull month and a lot of people struggle with January, grey, but all of a sudden it can become a little bit more exciting. So I'm also, it's money plus excitement plus that. By February, you're so deep into it that, there's a video that we show during the training that I deliver from Professor Nutt with Tony Franklin in the MRI scanner. And he proves at that point that it's about the anticipation, win or lose, irrelevant. But every 2 seconds, you can get a dopamine hit by just pressing that button because it might be this spin. It might be this one. So if it was about the win or lose, you're not going to get excited about what might happen. It's, I can remember walking into a bookies and all I wanted to do was feed that machine with thousands of pounds to get rid of it because I knew if I didn't lose it quickly, that was going to cost me 6 hours in there that day. That's not being about the money. It just isn't.
You've just flashed me back to the excitement. I used to work in restaurants back in Liverpool, and I'd know I'm going to the casino that night. My whole shift, I'd be skipping around the place. That anticipation, knowing I'm going. And then even more excitedly, as the ball is spinning around the roulette wheel, that is when my dopamine's at the highest. That's when my anticipation, that's when my excitement is at the highest. I wouldn't say win or lose, doesn't matter. Obviously, the win would give me more ammunition to keep going. The lose would frustrate me, but it didn't match that anticipation. I, similar to yourself, only realised this once I come out of the addiction. It was never about the money. It was always the thrill of the chase. It was always needing to be in action. Like you spoke about it on the big win. You were tossing and turning in bed. I need to get back into it now. I hope you get my sarcasm, but were you gonna stop as soon as that big win came? Pardon me, I'll do that again.
Yeah.
I hope you get my sarcasm. Were you gonna stop when that big win finally arrived?
100%. Like that was a stop point. It was. I said I'd have my big win. I've had it now. I'm going to buy the houses. I'm going to get my car, as I say, go on holiday. Life is sorted. That's me done. Thank God I can stop now. No chance. I can remember my dad asking me one day, he said, surely if you won £500,000 or £1,000,000, that would be it then? You're done. I said, no, because actually at the time I said to him, yeah, I was like, yeah, of course I would, because I wanted him to believe that there was a stop point. But the reality is I could win £10 million today. Within a year, I've lost 10 million and won. There is no doubt in that whatsoever. I had a serving Gurkha who I was supporting, and I could see it in him. He kept going, yeah, but if I have that win, and when I get that win, and he was really struggling to get his head around writing off what he had lost. I kept saying to him, you have to draw a line in the sand. What's gone has gone. He couldn't do that at all. It was driving him nuts. And I said, okay, so I will tell you 100% you will have a big win. You can almost guarantee you will have a decent size win, but within days it will be gone, and you will have lost more than ever. And he went, so you're telling me that I will have a big win? I said, there's a massive possibility you will have a big win, but you will lose it a week after. And he went, yeah, 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 I won't stop. I said, no, you won't. It's almost telling him that, yeah, absolutely, a lot of people do have a big win, but it's irrelevant because it's a short-term loan from that betting company. It's as simple as that. You are such a low-risk person to give money to that they know they're getting it back next week with interest. Guaranteed. A bank gives you money. I'm their highest risk. They're never getting their money back. I'm not repaying my loans. But if a gambling company gives me money, they know they're getting it back. So there's no two ways about it.
Winnings were just an illusion or a loan. Yeah, they were definitely coming back. A couple more funny ones. I can't imagine you in your bakers in your chef's hat when you were doing the baking that day. But again, that moment proved you weren't chasing the big win. You were chasing the feelings that it brought. That £20 win led you to be able to be that supportive partner that you wanted to be, and baking and going on that picnic and making that amazing memory. That's what you associated the gambling with, and that's again what took you back in there.
Yeah, 100%. I think sort of the baking, it actually come from prison. I'd done a cooking course in prison, and it sort of started baking. And honestly, for some reason, I loved it. And still to this day, I recommend it to anybody, because when we're looking for something to fill our void, fill that time, baking is the perfect opportunity because it kills so much time, but you've also got something at the end of it that you can give to someone. So whether we take that to family, whether we gift it to someone, whether I make someone a birthday cake, there's also something at the end. So that's baking. But yeah, it was an idea of bake free from addiction before, but we won't go into that. But it's that day I can remember, as I say, lockdown, we're quite miserable, it's hard, everybody's going through those tough times. So to all of a sudden be able to just buy all of that picnic stuff, go out together, there's hardly anyone else around, there's no stresses. That is what gambling gave me that day. If I hadn't gambled that £2, I couldn't have afforded the picnic stuff. So actually, that then normalised buying a scratch card because that's only £2. Like if I just done that once every time I went shopping, what's the harm? So it's that fooling yourself into, you can see those steps are happening, the free spins to the scratch card to the bookies. I'm in control. It's my addict in the back of my head telling me it's okay again.
Yeah, that addiction voice that speaks to you in your own voice and justifies everything. Yep, I have one of them in my head as well. Right, I've got a couple of questions, a couple more serious ones. First, I'm going to say that the man sitting in front of me that's telling this story, like I find it so hard to believe all of the things that you've said you did along the way. Like the person that's in front of you, so upfront and open and honest and happy to be vulnerable and share all of that. And it's like people say to me when they've sat down into it, they're like, I can't imagine you gambling. And I'm like, yeah, that I was a different person when I was gambling. Like I say, I'm now the best version of myself. You spoke about being able to draw a line under the money that's gone. I see all of that money that I lost as an investment in me becoming the best person. The best version of myself that I am today. I had to use that money to realize I needed to change all my self-esteem and stuff like that you spoke about. That day in court, you said your partner wasn't there, you had no solicitor, your family weren't there. Speaking of how lonely was it when you were up there by yourself?
I think it's a really interesting one for me, and I sort of And yeah, those comments you just said about being that person, I think underneath, throughout my whole life, I've known that there is a good person there. Like, even when I'm being called a monster or called whatever. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things in life is I know that 95% of me is good, but that five far outweighs it. And I think when I'm stood in the dock, that is where it really hits home of, people have told you for years you're going to lose everything. You're going to lose everyone. And actually, when you're stood there, there was an element where I went, this is all coming true. This is all coming to fruition. I'm literally stood on my own. Who else goes to court completely alone? And, for me, I think, yeah, it hit. And then the problem being that when I was allowed off with a suspended sentence, I've still walked home that day into a family home. My daughter's still there. My wife is raging because I gave a TV interview, sort of outside of the court. Um, but she's still there, so again, I think it was so difficult that you almost want to be on your own. And it sounds probably harsh, but when I'm stood in that dock on my own, I'm glad my daughter's not there. I'm glad my wife's not there. I'm glad I haven't got to face the victims even that weren't in the courtroom. I was relieved at that because actually I can deal with everything on my own. And it's the same today. There's days where I'd much rather be on my own, doing my own thing, because I'm the only person who can really affect whether it goes well or no. If something goes wrong, that's totally down to me. If something goes really well, that's down to me. That's fine. And it's interesting that my youngest daughter is very much the same with that now. She's cut herself off from almost everybody, even at Christmas time, because she is the only one who is then, liable for what she does or doesn't do, because if she lets me back into her life, she's already said, you're the person I love the most. So actually, you're the only person who can truly hurt me. So if she lets me back in and I gamble again or I do something again, she's opening herself up to that hurt. And I think I was very much always the same. I didn't want anybody close to me. So for me, I was probably quite happy that I had no one, if I'm being totally honest. But it did bring to light the fact that I've been told for years that you will end up with nobody. And I didn't believe them. I went, of course I will. They'll always be there. But they're not. There comes a time where they're not. Your family will, you know, be unable to keep going through that pain.
How hard is it not having that relationship with your youngest?
Really, really difficult. I think I'm learning to understand more. And actually she's flying out to my sister out in New Zealand on 22nd of January. She's going out for 6 weeks to then decide if she wants to sort of go out longer, a work visa and everything else. So she is so independent and capable, but I know that there is such a level of harm there that this isn't driven, from her genuine want. This is driven through trauma. Her closing herself off, not wanting anything to do with anybody, is a trauma response, and I so wish that she would talk to someone, a professional, and sort of get that. But if she doesn't, and she's not ready for that, that's also fine. So she has said that she'll see me before she flies out because she would hate to think if anything happened that she had never, sort of seen me before she went. So that's massive, and I will go up and see her off at the airport. And um, yeah, I know she loves it. I think the thing is, she'll openly say, "I just love him so much," but I'm scared. I'm scared to let him back in. Whereas my other two, I think, have grown in strength to the point that they can say, "Do you know what? If you do it again, that's all on you. Like we've told you where we are. We've set our boundaries. If you do it again, we are genuinely done." Like, and I think they would be happy with that. They've given everything they can to it. Um, and those relationships are great, So yeah, it's a work in progress. I think that trust with my youngest one will take many, many years. She's seen so much, she's been through so much, and all I can do is just let her know I'm there, send the cards, send the messages regularly, committed to that. So many promises have been broken that all I can do is keep showing her that I'm there. And she knows if anything ever goes wrong, she can just phone me up within minutes and I'll be there, So yeah, that's the only way I can manage it, really.
Just you can control the controllables. Keep doing the next right thing. Let her know your door's always open for when she's ready to come round.
Yeah. Yeah.
The conversation, I think, with your two oldest children, when you said it
Mm.
was the third time you were ready to not be here anymore, and you drove back to tell them about it. But after speaking to them, you ended up driving to Gordon Moody instead. Tell me, how did that conversation go? Do you believe that that conversation is the reason you didn't do what you wanted to?
But it was a completely selfish act yet again. Of course it was, because, I've driven down there for the hope that they were going to cast me out of their life. And, if we look at that, they've been through so much already that I'm now going to potentially put on them some trauma for the rest of their lives, because the last thing they'd remember saying to me is to get out of our lives. And the next thing they hear is from a policeman that their dad's died. They would have been left crippled for the rest of their lives. But again, that's selfish. I suppose you could call it the addict kind of behavior. We're not thinking that. I'm just thinking what I need to do at that point to take myself out of this pain. And if they had said, we just don't want to know, they wouldn't see me or whatever, it would have been so much easier to drive into that lorry. So much easier. The fact that there's people there that do love you and they're willing to give you a chance, it it just means everything, really. But I still didn't want to be here. I still drove on those. There's three or four fast passing areas on the A303, and I still drive. I'll drive them to this day. I drove them last week, and you're going up them, and that day I'm thinking, just do it. Just, do you know what? Just do it. It was such a nice feeling. And I'd grown up with that suicide ideation for 20, 30 years. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't new to me, but I think the such ferocity that I had that day to do it was so strong. To put it in gambling terms, it was almost that one last spin that I was giving it. I'll go into Gordon Moody and I'll give it one last go. And yeah, they did. Completely, they saved my life that day. That's not not a throwaway comment. They 100% saved my life that day.
Something similar when my last bet was October 2021. I had something similar where I was going to go to the old apartment block where we lived. I still had the key, go up to the 7th floor, and I was going to video my family and tell them all I loved them and do it. And the thought that snapped me out of that thinking was I had a 2-year-old and a less than 1-year-old, and I imagined those two growing up without a dad. And that was enough for me to be, no, I need to face up to this now. I need to take responsibility for what I've done, and touch wood, I've been doing the next right thing since then. So similar to yourself, your kids are a massive part of you turning it around. You spoke of you've spoke about so much stuff. You've been so vulnerable, Andy. Thank you so much for that. You spoke about the domestic abuse, and you worded it. You said, like, I speak about it because I know it helps others. It's funny, as you were speaking about it, it got me thinking. I was addicted for 22 years. My wife suffered for the last 4 of those years. It got me thinking about her and thinking, how did I impact her? And that person that would leave in the morning is not that person that would come home. So even just talking to me about it today, it did exactly what it said on the tin. What you wanted to do worked with me, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are feeling the same. So thank you so much. It must have been so hard to the first time you spoke of that, it must have been so hard to be able to admit it. Like I said before, the man sitting in front of me, I'm in awe of you. The self-awareness and everything that you're able to speak about so publicly. But I want you to know that it's already helped me, and I'm sure people listening to this, it's going to help hundreds, thousands more. So I just want to say thank you for being so open and so vulnerable.
No, thank you, Dan. As I say, it does really matter to me, and I will have my detractors, and I will have people saying that I shouldn't be talking about it. And I think that's ridiculous, because again, you need the one place that you can learn from why somebody does something is from the person themselves, who when they're at the right stage, they've done the work, they are truly remorseful. And it's something that even throughout my life, even when I couldn't see I was doing it, if I seen something like that going on, I'd be the first person to jump in. If I seen that a man was shouting at a woman, I'd be the first person in there. you know but when I'm trying to protect my gambling, and gambling is my one true love, I would do anything, and that included being abusive. You're not stood there going, oh, well, I'll tell her this or I'll do that. It's not as conscious. But actually looking back, I genuinely, honestly believe that the best way to reduce violence against women and girls is to educate children, is to educate our sons. Because if they're seeing that in the home or hearing that in the home, and they're led to believe that that's okay to talk to women in that way, even that's how you treat women, what better age to teach them than a very young age that what a healthy relationship is. But also to warn that once you start gambling, you can take the person with the strongest morals ever and they will change who they are. I talk to prison officers now who, again, people would look and go, oh, well, they must be their morals must be really strong. They are, but if one adopts a gambling addiction or starts suffering gambling harms, he is then open to corruption. Because even though he wouldn't take a penny from me today, next week when he's got absolutely nothing, the chances are he may be open to that corruption. And it's no different with domestic abuse. That person could be the perfect partner, and actually that makes it worse because you know them as that nice man, that nice person. You know, so when they start to change and when their moods change and they start getting angry, the partner will often look for reasons for that. They will look for excuses for them, why they're being like that. They're stressed at work. They're stressed with this, with that. I did annoy them, you know, and actually my biggest concern is like looking at my daughter today. She gets into a relationship. What is her tolerance levels for a partner? Because with dad used to be a bit like that. With dad used to say that to mum. We got to stop the normalization of it. And I think whilst we only hear the survivors kind of narrative, it stays that one narrative, which is they're all this and they do this because of this, they do this because of that. And I'm listening going, I didn't. That wasn't my mindset. So we need to open up that conversation, I think. It's a sensitive area, but it's one that I'm happy to, you know, I can't take it back, can I? But what I can do is try and, make sure that the next generation don't. So,
Even just speaking broader about that, I've got two young daughters who are now 4 and 6, and you've just reminded me of like if I have a slightly raised voice when I'm talking to my wife, that in the back of my head is me. I'm now showing my daughters the way that it's acceptable for them to be treated, and that instantly flicks a switch inside of me, and I'm like lower the tone of your voice. Or if I yell at one of my girls, if I'm taking something out on them that I'm unhappy about and they've just done the smallest thing and I've ended up yelling at them, I always think back to that. I'm teaching them how to be treated by their potential partners in the future. And yeah, just saying that then just really pulled on my heartstrings. Another bit that it broke my heart in the story when you said you went on the winning streak. You bought all the fancy laptops and everything for the kids, and then you've lost your money a few days later, come home and you're arguing, and you said they were packing up the things upstairs. When you first said that, I thought you meant they were packing them up, they were hiding them because they knew you were going to come and try and get them to sell them. But when you said they were packing them up to give back because they felt guilty about having them, it broke my heart, man.
it still does mine to this day, even though my voice now can kind of control that crack, if you like. My voice used to break straight away because anything to do with those vulnerable children at those ages that are so innocent in all of it, and to know that not only that day that they were upset and upside down, it's the fact that still to this day those legacy harms, as I mentioned them, my son with the selfishness, my daughter with her own self-esteem and confidence, my other daughter sort of struggling to get her head around life really, and sort of open up to people. it is. I can't blame myself 100%. But a lot of that stems from my behaviour, and it's behaviour that I would detest in anybody else. And all I can ever say is, it sounds like an excuse, but I didn't even see it. I wouldn't even recognise that I'd done that on that day. I've carried so many things around with me, feeling guilt for and shame for, that when I talk to them, they don't remember at all. Yet it's those things that I haven't remembered, but they've carried with them. So I think the key to it all is that communication. If they are of an age that you can have that conversation with them, you've got to give them that opportunity to ask the questions, to get the answers. And actually, I got a lot of answers that, why are you carrying that with you? It didn't even register with us. So I'm carrying all this guilt for things that they don't even remember. So, yeah, I think having those chats with them now, again, doesn't take the pain away for them, but it allows them a voice, and it allows them to get answers on things that maybe they're carrying with them. So, yeah.
Communication is key. You spoke of the crack in the voice, mate. I'm getting all emotional talking about my daughters and just hearing your story and reliving your story with you. I was literally on the verge of tears just before. I'm getting emotional. I've only had that since coming into recovery. I got in touch with my emotions again, and I'm not ashamed to admit, a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old daughter, I am a big softie now. Any movie that has a daddy daughter in it, that has the slightest upset in it, I'm in tears, I'm in bits. Obviously your gambling was an escape. Were you numb to your emotions in your addiction, and how is that now in recovery?
Yeah, I always remember I used some peer support groups. I used GamFam as one of my tools, online peer support groups. And there's a guy on there called Dean, who he always says that the great thing about recovery is you get your emotions back. And one of the worst things about recovery is you get your emotions back. And it is so true, because I was even saying it to the guy yesterday, because it's great to be able to feel and to recognize. And like I do now, as you say, I'm very self-aware that I'll start looking at why and how, and I love that kind of thing. But actually, the worst thing about it is then realizing everything that you've done, all of those things that you've brushed under the carpet, not seen, just you're blinkered, all of a sudden it all comes flooding back. And that is why I think a lot of people early in recovery, especially, do lapse and do relapse, because they haven't planned or allowed for all of those emotions coming back in. And something that especially men still struggle with is still the talking about thoughts, feelings, and emotions. The one thing I'll do now, I'm quite a big bloke, I'm about 19 stone and about 6'3". I'll stand up in front of a load of army soldiers and I'll talk about thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And I'm like, I don't care, because unless you do, you will be stood where I am potentially, or in my position in years to come, because it is key, is going, actually, that's what I'm feeling today. Why am I feeling that? Maybe because I was, reminiscing about that yesterday. Maybe that's what's triggered that thought. So I think earlier where you said you do a bit every day, and daily reflections is a big one. How did I feel yesterday? Why did I feel like that? What will I do today? Well, how did I feel today? You do that at the end of the night. And it's always interesting that part of that is thoughts, feelings, and emotions. What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What were what were your emotions? Because any lapse, there's normally a pattern 2 weeks prior, 3 weeks prior. The stress starts, the guilt starts, and little things are happening 2, 3 weeks prior. So people will say, oh, I had a slip today. One day I've had a slip. And they'll look for the trigger on that day, won't they? But actually, the trigger was 3 weeks ago. You've just managed to maintain that for 3 weeks. So, and I think that's why emotions are key, because we need to understand them, to understand that that's what it causes in me. Because there's certain emotions that I still want to run away from. There's certain thoughts, certain feelings that I still want to run away from. Where do I go nowadays? I haven't had a drink for 7 years. I haven't gambled for 4 years. I don't, like, I look and I go, well, now what do I go to? I go to my vape and I'm on it 24/7. But where I go to now is somebody like Matt Losing, who has been a massive support for me. Dina mentioned, we've got so many people, Reese, that I know I could pick my phone up today and I could phone any one of them and they would answer and we'll talk it through. That's the key, is finding your tribe, as people call it, and having those few close that you said your friend earlier, he knows he can phone you at any point, and you'll answer and you'll try and help him. So it's because those people are in the same position as I am. They also need to talk about those emotions. So yeah, they do come flooding back, and it's always at the wrong time, when you're at your lowest and you're struggling. So yeah.
Yeah, building a recovery community. That's a big part of my recovery. I'm just going to give a bit more of my experience there. You spoke of the relapse. I relapsed today. It happened today. What happened today? Another person, that won't disclose who they are, someone close to me, their partner, they struggle with the gambling, but their partner often messages me to try and sort of ask me for help and advice on what they can do. And we're recording this in early 2026. In April of last year, they went to Grand National, and I seen pictures of it, and I messaged the partner. I was like, "Oh, he's gambling again," and she was like, "Yeah, it was all controlled gambling. I was in control of the money. It was just £5 here. I controlled everything. It was completely fine." In December of the same year, went off the rails again and blew everything. And she was asking me about it, and I said, "Do you want to know when this started?" And she's like, "It happened 3 times in December. It started then." I said, "No, this started back in April when you did those controlled bets." I say that first bet is the only one that we can control. Once that first bet happens, whether it's an hour later, a week later, a month later, it will get out of control again at some point. That's what keeps me stopped. I know I cannot place that first bet. One bet is too many. 1,000 isn't enough. And it's so true. I love that saying.
There is no stopping, as you say. I know if I went, it's interesting. We went into a charity shop, become our thing at one point, and sort of loved going around the charity shops, and they were having a raffle for a new scanner at the hospital. And she said, "Oh, do you want to buy a raffle ticket?" I said, "No, I'm all right, thanks, and I'm all good." Tried to downplay it, and then she went, "Oh," and you could see sort of, I said, "Oh, I've got a gambling addiction." I said, "I don't," and she went, "Oh, I've heard it all now." She said, "God, what next?" And I was like, honestly, like so I said, "Look, there's £2, sort of just, I don't want a ticket, but just, I'm not tight." Um, but yeah, and if I had bought that raffle ticket
that day.
Yeah, but if I had bought a raffle ticket, and I won that raffle that might have been £100, I think it was, first prize or whatever. And I tell you, an interesting one was Kev at Gordon Moody. So we went out. We used to have a day out on a Saturday, and we got out and we went to the McDonald's. About 15 of us, and the lady come down and said, "Because there's over 10 of you, I'll give you all a number. Whoever's number I pull out, they get a free McFlurry." And he shot up off his seat, "No," and said nothing else. And I'm cringing. I'm thinking, this really embarrassing. Why didn't he just say to her, "Oh, no, sorry, we can't," And he didn't even explain it. He didn't say why or nothing. And this poor woman's just stood going, "What the hell's that about?" And after he went, "Why should I have to explain it?" And I was still thinking, "God, that's rude. I can't deal with that." But actually thinking back to it, he's right. Because if somebody had won that McFlurry, the rest of the table would have been, "Oh, Andy won the McFlurry." Look, oh, you know, and actually the person winning it has got all that attention on them. It's interesting how those little things that we wouldn't consider can lead to, as you say, 8 months later, because that gave him the taster again, didn't it? Yeah.
And not just if you won, the other 9 people, the anticipation of waiting to see the win, even though they didn't win, it could have relit the fire in them as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to admit, you say you don't need an explanation. I've used my power for bad at one point. I was at the shops and somebody was pulled me over. Somebody who was I think collecting money for charity. I honestly didn't have the time, and they started talking to me, and I didn't want to just be rude and say no and walk off, but I stopped them very early. I just said, "Listen, I've had a gambling addiction for 22 years and I'm paying off debts. I don't have any money." And they just stopped in their tracks. But yeah, I used that to sort of get out of the 5-minute conversation that I was going to get stuck in because I was in a rush. But yeah, there's something about not needing to explain. There's power there. I like that. I'm a people pleaser. It's a massive part of my recovery, and I over explain and over excuse things. So I love the not needing to explain it. I'm going to pull you a little bit on GA. You said it's have you ever done it? First of all, the first time, as you were going through your story, the first time I heard you say that you went for help was the counselling that you went with your partner. At any point in those 33 years, were you trying GA? Were you trying counselling? Were you trying anything to get better? Were you just trying to white knuckle it the whole way?
Yeah, not at all. It wasn't until the first arrest for fraud in 2016 that did I even look to get any help, and that was only because it was the court case. There was no GA. There was excuses when I was younger. My sister tried to sort of help, and then I think the nearest GA she could find was in Exeter or something when we were living in Cornwall, and it was miles away. Um, and I tried nothing. I absolutely tried nothing. And again, I think it's because I loved gambling. Why do I want to give up something that I love? And I think, even at that point in 2016, it was all a sticking plaster to just get people to ease off a bit, and then I can go back to it when, it's like being caught out cheating, isn't it? In a relationship, and it's, oh, well, let's just cool it off a bit. We won't message, we won't meet each other. And then, however long down the line people end up meeting again, you're always leaving a trap door open. So I don't think I ever wanted help. Never wanted help. Yeah.
Yeah, leaving that back door open to go back out there.
Mm.
It's a good job I haven't got anybody booked in after yourself, Andy. We've finally spoken about your gambling. It's time to speak about your recovery now. So I had so much to digest in your story. What I took from it, the turning point, was the guy in Gordon Moody saying to you, "You won't do it," and you were like, "I want to prove you wrong." Was that the last day without it since your last bet date?
No, so four weeks prior to that. So when I went into Gordon Moody, the day I went in, I hadn't had a bet since that day. So I wasn't gambling for the 4 weeks, and mainly because they had our card. They had, like, you just go shopping, you bring your receipt back, and you bring the money back. So there was no chance to, should we say, in that 4 weeks. Um, but yeah, and I think even the day before I went into Gordon Moody, and Kate, my partner, she transferred £500, which was then my food money for the time that you're in kind of rehab, and she said, if you spend a penny of that on gambling, we are done. Within 10 minutes, I deposited 50 quid on a gambling site. That's a day before I'm going into rehab. That's a day, so yeah, if I'd had access over that 4 weeks, I'm pretty sure I would have been, you know. But yeah, I think it was just that day that I think he gave it to me straight. I think the problem with me is if somebody had come in and given me any opportunity to manipulate them, I would have, I would have been all over it. If a therapist come in with just some book knowledge, and they were all nice to me, the chances are it probably wouldn't have worked, So yeah, I thank that man with everything I got. Really, it's
What
yeah.
did recovery look like when you first came out of Gordon Moody? What does it look like today?
So when I come out, I took it very seriously because Johnny, again, my therapist said you need to be doing at least 3, if not 4 hours a week, like groups and the one-to-one therapy. And I think I took it to the extreme. I mentioned I used the online support groups, peer support groups, and they were on a sort of Monday, Wednesday, Friday night, and Saturday morning. So there was 4 hours. I was doing some GA online, or the sort of recovery, and I also had sessions with a one-to-one therapist, and I used Epic Restart Foundation, who also gave me a mentor plus another session. So all of a sudden, I think most weeks I would do around 9 hours, 10 hours a week on my recovery. And that went on for, I reckon, 12 months, close on 12 months. It was that sustained. And then I was due to get sentenced in the January of the following year. And I think at that point it dropped to about 4 because I wanted to spend, more time with my partner and everything else prior to getting sentenced, going to prison. and I was feeling better. And then really that's about where it maintained. I would still do 3 or 4 hours a week every single week. And then when I got into prison, that was always going to be a challenging time. And that's where the governor allowed me to set up peer support groups in prison. And I used to facilitate them every Friday, as well as I was given a role as a gambling peer mentor. So I would go around and talk to people one to one. So almost every day there was something that I was doing for my recovery, So if you just think you're going to walk out of a rehab or just, I'm fixed after 4 or 5 weeks, I'm not saying I live it, that I'm conscious of it all the time, but I I know when something's not right. You mentioned driving fast earlier. I start getting speeding fines. I was up to 9 points at one point, and I'm absolutely bricking it because my car is also, my job almost with the traveling around. But I was still being impulsive. So what I'll do at that point is go back onto a group. I'll go back to seek out a therapist who can help me maybe more with the impulse control. So it's about just being aware, I think, being aware of, are there any changes in my behavior, my mood, and actually then going, okay, why is that? So, I might not be doing as many hours on groups, but I do hours on myself, I think.
Funny you said there, the self-awareness. It's the first step of everything for me, the self-awareness. You said earlier, while you were in your addiction, while you were manipulating people, the domestic abuse, the money, you said, I'm sure people won't believe me, but I genuinely couldn't see it while I was doing it. I fully believe you because I know I was the exact same. You can't see it while you're in it. But as soon as you become self-aware, as soon as that self-awareness clicks, that's the first step for me. That's when you can change. If you can't see the behavior, if you're not aware of it, there's nothing you can do about it. Like, I want that recovery for that person I spoke about in Melbourne so badly, but they're just not aware of it themselves. I cannot recover for them. It's got to come from within. That self-awareness is the key, is the first step for me. And then you sort of channel out from there. I want to speak to you about prison. The 130 pages that you wrote in there has got a title, HMS to HMP. It became a book that you released in 2022. Describe me through what it was like in prison, what it was like putting that out on paper, and what it's been like releasing a book, how that feels.
Yeah, prison was lovely. It was like a holiday camp. No,
I wasn't
it
expecting
genuinely,
that.
no, it genuinely, it's one of those that I think I mentioned earlier. It's not the living conditions. Like you can live in that. It's really difficult when you're what they call padded up with someone. So you're in with somebody else, and actually, if you don't get on with that person, or they're on some form of substance, whether they're on spice or, whatever they may be on, that is really, really difficult because part of me, especially on the second sentence, I get addiction completely. So I have a lot of, empathy for somebody who's struggling with that addiction. However, when you're living in an 8 by 10 cell, with somebody for 23 hours and they're lighting up a bit of paper soaked in spice, it's really difficult to try and, one, understand it. Two, is more that you're almost in fear of, because they're not the same person once they smoke that bit of paper. But it's also getting up in the morning. And as I say, talk tends to be dominated around what they can rob, like what drugs they can get hold of that day, who's swapping what for what, who's going to get beaten up, who's going to get stabbed, and whatever. And actually, it's quite like a school playground because very little of it actually gets carried out, especially in the C cats where I was. I'm pretty sure in B cats, A cats, different story. But there's a lot of what I would say are broken children in adult bodies in there. There are a lot of people who are emotionally damaged children who are no different than me whatsoever, or my children, and they haven't been given that sort of direction and that help growing up, and the moral structure and the moral compass growing up, and all they're really craving is somebody to show them a bit of care, a bit of love, and actually give them a bit of time. Because what I found is that once I started talking to them, they all thought I was a copper. You know, you look like a copper. I had DCI written on my name card outside my cell. And actually, at one point, it was a bit ropey because, you know, if somebody did take that seriously, and obviously they can get you Googled nowadays. So I was all right within a couple of weeks. But, you know, so everybody gave me a bit of a wide berth because he's a bit weird. Like, he, I don't know. He's, you know, then when they come and talk to you, they're like, oh, you'll sound you. Like, can we come and have a chat? You know, next thing they're in my cell crying, walk out onto the landing and giving it the big un, you know, carrying the carpets under their arms again, shouting and bawling. And because that's the mask that they put on. I'm not saying everybody, I'm not saying every prisoner could be rehabilitated, but there are some really simple processes that could take place, which is peer support. Again, somebody who's been there, somebody who's done it. I've been back, fortunate this year, I've been back into quite a few prisons, up in Hindley and Preston and Doncaster and places like that, and in the Southwest. And when I tell my story to prisoners, you get those that are like, you know, ribbing each other, and but you can always guarantee there's someone there who goes, mate, I just need to change this. I need to turn my stuff around. I need to get this going. And that's all they need. They need that bit of hope, because if you get released with £90 in your pocket, you know, and you got to go to DWP that day, probation that day, you don't know where you're going to be living that night, if anywhere. You could be homeless. How do they expect you to maintain a stable life? You know, when you've come out with 90 quid in your pocket, it's not going to happen. Most of them only know one thing. But as I say, there's so much mental health in there and so many with adverse childhood experiences that if we deal with them, we could help them stop the reoffending. I think when it comes to the book, I, you know, my brain works very quick, as you've probably heard. I talk very quick, I talk a lot. But when you're in a prison cell for 23 hours, and you've got nowhere to go, nothing to do. You don't know when that door's opening next. You're clawing at the walls. So what I found was I was really desperate to understand, why do I do what I do? Why? I know I'm not this bad person, but I'm doing really bad things. I can see I've done horrendous things. I need to understand. So I just started writing my childhood down from minute one right the way through. I intended to just stop at some point, maybe a few sheets to go to a psychology appointment with. That was the original, was try and sort of understand. And I just carried on writing. I would get up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, sit at the little desk, and just write away, just page after page after page. And it wasn't until I read it back one day and somebody else asked what it was. They read some of it. And he come up, and I can remember this prisoner coming up saying, I really hate you, but I really like you. He said, it's really difficult because I'm reading it going, I hate this person. He said, but I know you already. I've known you for a few months. He said, and like you've said today, I know you. Or you know, he knew me, and I'd helped him and I had helped a lot of other people. He said, but reading this, I'm hating this person. Like, I literally reading this book going, I cannot stand this person. So he said, if I didn't know it was you, I would have, you know, been disgusted. So I knew at that point, by putting it out there, it was a risk that, you know, people would judge, people would make their own assumptions. I've had things this year where I was nominated for something and then had it withdrawn only a couple of days later because somebody had complained. You know, and that's purely, it's not down to the fraud charge, that's down to the assault charge. Now, when you look at a fraud charge or the fraud conviction, the crime, there were numerous, you know, victims to that, tens of victims to those, and they are all going home questioning their own judgment of people, questioning who they work with. The next person to get a job there is being scrutinised. They've been financially damaged, but everybody will just go, "Oh, that's only fraud. Fraud's okay." You know, how do we say that that crime is okay, that crime's not, that one's abhorrent, that one's not? Like, it's crazy. But the one thing that I can always do is walk into a room and know that I've told the truth. I could never walk into a room today and nobody could ever say, yeah, but and you done that. Yeah, but you don't talk about that. You that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be able to walk in a room and everybody knows the story. If they talk to me, brilliant. If they don't, okay, that's also okay. I know those people I've got around me who know my whole story are there for the right reasons. So I think that's why I put it out there. And I think the 48 hours in a gambler's mind at the beginning normally blows people's minds. Parents have said it's really helped them understand why their son, why their daughter does it. Wives have said, I can understand more of why he does it now, if that's how his brain is working. And actually that encourages them to seek help, to get them help, and it may be that a partner goes, actually, I've been living with you as an abuser for years, I'm off. And if that's the case, that's the case. I want to highlight that to partners that it's not okay. And that's what the book does, that really. It just lays it all out there.
The full title of the book, HMS.
Yeah, just HMS to HMP, 33 years of gambling addiction, but it's only on Amazon.
That's where people can go who are interested and want to find out more. Amazon. We'll put a link below when we're finished here. Check out the video description for a link to Andy's book. I'm sure there's a few juicy prison stories in there that I won't pry you open. I'll keep them in the book. I love that you were the DCI for the first 3 weeks, and then you turned into the psychotherapist of the ward for the rest of your stay.
Yeah.
You've briefly spoken on it there, but I've got a quote from another podcast that you've done where you've shared your story, and you said your addict self is different from who you are now, separating the identity from the addiction. Someone who's watching, who's been struggling with that, struggling to forgive themselves or struggling to let go of all the hurt and the damage that they've done, similar to what we've spoke about today. Give them some advice. How did you separate yourself now from the person that you were then?
So I think that come down to one of the steps really, which was that making amends. Now, if I can go back and do anything to reduce that harm or to change it or to do anything for that person today, and I haven't done, then I still deserve to carry that guilt forward. If I've done everything that I can and I've tried to make amends and am I doing the right thing today, then I have to let it go. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise, it's like I mentioned earlier with my children, is I'm carrying hundreds of things around, feeling guilt for, that they don't even remember. They're not even a thing. So we will give ourselves a far harder time than most people will ever remember what we've done. It's a case of, are you doing everything right today? And if you can honestly answer yourself, self-honesty is the biggest thing in this. Are you doing the right thing today? If you are, then you have every right to let it go. If you are, still pushing boundaries, as you mentioned earlier, if you're still doing maybe things a little bit wrong, then you need to question yourself, and actually you do deserve to carry that guilt forward. So it all comes down for me to self-honesty, because we can tell everybody else we're doing well. As I mentioned earlier, I do daily recovery and I do daily reflections and, whatever else that may be. But actually, you're only lying to yourself. So as long as you aren't lying to yourself, you have to let it go. I can remember, I think it was my therapist said how it worked for him was he placed all of his guilt and all of those bad things in a bag at the side of a road, and he drove off from it. And every day that he didn't do something wrong, he moved further and further away from that bag. But every time he'd done something and pushed a boundary or, pushed his luck or even gambled, that bag is coming right back into your rearview mirror, but you have every right to just put it on the side of the road and literally drive away from it. Because I was one of those people, I also didn't want to blame anyone. And I still don't to this day. There is nobody. But when I look at my upbringing and my mum and some of those learned behaviours and adverse childhood experiences, they're also not her problem. But what I can do and did was bag them up and place them at her doorstep. So I don't have to batter her with them. They're just left there where they are. And the only other thing I'd say to anybody to do is the no send letters. I think they're really, really powerful. So it was, I wrote a letter to my mum, I wrote a letter to my dad, I wrote a letter to ex-partners, sort of whether that be apologising or whether it be addressing things that I wanted to address. And you don't send them. So you can either keep them, you can burn them, you can rip them up, but either way, it's out, it's gone. By putting it onto paper and going. What a lot of people do is keep them because it may well be that they feel strong enough to send one of those letters in a couple of years' time, you know, and it reminds them of maybe the hurt they've, put that person through, or some of the things they really need to say to someone. So, yeah, no send letters are a really powerful thing.
I like that. Brilliant advice. I'm going to be selfish and give a confession for my own benefit. Before sitting down with yourself, I had somebody else booked in for a session before yourself, and they cancelled on me something. They messaged me 16 hours before saying something's come up with work. Can we postpone 24 hours? And I was completely fine with it. I was like, of course, yeah, I understand everyone's getting back to work now. There's loads of stuff going on. I've had 16 hours notice. I was like, of course, I wasn't offended in the slightest or anything. It was completely fine. But then as soon as I had to postpone our sit down 30 minutes, I was riddled with guilt. I had that voice in my head saying, oh, he's a former Navy veteran. He'll be so impeccable with his time and he'll be so offended that I'm delaying it 30 minutes. And we spoke about self-esteem earlier. It just shows that there's still a lot of work that I have to do with my self-esteem, where I don't know what the word is, I'm unprioritizing myself. I'm putting other people ahead of myself. Where someone cancels on me, that's completely fine. But if I want to postpone 30 minutes, that's not fine. That's not okay. I'm really bad for doing that. So thank you for inspiring me to put that out there in the world, and hopefully that helps me. The self-awareness that my self-esteem still needs a lot of work on it. I do say that working on myself is the project of working on myself is something that I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. There's no finish goal. The end goal is me on my deathbed. So I don't need to have all these problems figured out today, but I'll go back to it. Being self-aware of them is the first step, and then a work in progress for the rest of my life, trying to get it better. Right. The 14 pages of notes that I've got from your story. I think I've asked all the questions that I wanted to. Sitting here with me today, Andy, what are you hoping somebody who's been on this journey with us, who's I imagine gone for a few bathroom breaks, but they've managed to stay the entire length with us? What are you hoping they take from hearing your story today?
I think one that, it doesn't matter how far you've dropped really, or you think you've got to rock bottom. I think one would be a warning message, which is if you think you've hit rock bottom, there's still more to go. Don't let yourself. People always talk about rock bottom, and if you think about that, the first time I went to prison, that would have been my rock bottom, wouldn't it? And I believed it was, and I ended up back there. If you think there's an end to where gambling will take you and to the consequences of gambling, there is no end, because the only end is, unfortunately, somebody taking their life, which happens all too regularly. If you're out there thinking that you can't stop and that it's got a grip on you and it's this, massive thing, is literally to reach out for help. Reach out to you, reach out to me, reach out to anybody, and just don't be afraid to ask for help. I think it's one of the strongest things I've ever done. People will, there's a lot of stigma around it, that it's weakness and it's everything else. It's not at all. Asking for help is one of the hardest things you will ever do, but the help is there, the support is there. And if anybody ever needed to know that, a sustained addiction could be broken, I think I'm an example, you're an example. There are hundreds of examples out there. Learn from everybody. That I think one key for me was, when it comes to learning, is that I could learn as much from the homeless man on the street today and as I can from the CEO of a massive multinational company, because we all have something to learn from each other. I've learned from you today about the lion. You've learned from me. Other people will learn from this. It's about being open-minded to learning, to not judge, to not judge that person next to you. We're all going through different things, but ultimately, the overall for me will always be to talk. Simple as that. You have to talk. whilst you keep it in your head, that is all coming spilling out at some point. And as I say, I'm here to talk. You're there to talk. There's enough people out there. I think there's amazing community of people, lived experience especially, and just reach out to one of them first, and they can always signpost you to the right way as and when you want it and need it.
Couldn't agree more. Reach out, speak to somebody. The addiction thrives in secrecy. Get it out there, get it into the world. Guys, if you're really struggling right now, get in the comments below. Let me know what's going on. If you need advice on where to turn, where to look for help, let me know below. I respond to all the comments. And the connection, I fully believe connection is the opposite to addiction. The easiest way to connect with somebody is to be vulnerable with them. Just sitting here for this 2 hours with you today, I feel so connected to you right now. Thank you so much for sharing so openly, so honestly, and being so vulnerable and taking me on that roller coaster with you. It always sounds weird saying this at the end of an episode, but I've thoroughly enjoyed listening. The stories are always full of heartache and shame and harm and hurt, but I've enjoyed sitting with the person who's sitting here with me today, telling me the story of what you did and how you've become the person that you are today. I fully believe, similar to myself, you're the best version of yourself you've ever been, from hearing your story from 9 years old up until the person you are today. Just thank you. And thank you for all the work you're doing in the industry as well. We didn't even get to mention. Tell me a little bit about it before we go. Beacon Counselling Trust, it's based in Liverpool, close to my heart. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Beacon established the Armed Forces Gambling Support Network. So Beacon were the parent sort of organisation for that. They created a network within the UK with 4 other organisations to address the growing issue and the massive issue within the armed forces and veteran world. And as we've just been talking about, talking and opening up, one of the worst cohorts for not doing that are the armed forces. And that's due to all of that stigma around that. So there's a lot of reasons why veterans and serving personnel are 8 to 10 times more likely than the general public to suffer with gambling harms. So what we do is we take a lot of those elements, put them into a training package, and we deliver awareness and prevention training. But you can help level 1 and level 2 throughout armed forces personnel and veteran organisations, just to raise the awareness, let them know the support is there. And it's been really, really well received. And I just love doing it because, I will use part of my story within that. And I think that's what resonates, and people are able to then open up. As I think I've carried out 33 brief interventions in the last 3 months. And these are service personnel who would never have talked about deep and meaningful before, and we're having phone calls about everything and anything. So it's working, and it's so needed. So hopefully, with all of the levy change and everything else, the political landscape, hopefully things just carry on, because we need this work being carried out. So
you said there you love it. Is it similar to what I've just said to you, where those people who've reached out, those interventions, you feel connected to them from how vulnerable and how open, how proud you are that you've been able to break down that tough exterior, and they're so open and honest with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing I'm always proud about is when you take somebody who is so dismissive, so sort of derogatory about the work you're doing, and by the end of the hour and a half level 1 training, they're coming up saying, wow, like, I need to know more. That is the biggest thing for me. Preaching to the converted. What happens a lot in this space is people hold conferences and, sort of events like that where they're preaching to each other. One organisation preaching to another who are of the same opinion. Whereas when you go into the armed forces, quite often they're really dismissive of it. So, and that bravado, alpha bravado environment, and actually to stand there and then be accepted, and for people to go, shit, I hadn't thought of that, I hadn't thought of this. It matters. Prison's the same.
I love it. Andy, is there anything I haven't asked you today that you want to get out there? I've ticked everything off my sheet. Is there anything left on your sheet?
No, you got about 3 hours out of it. No, I do apologise for the time, but yeah, all good.
Do not apologise. I've thoroughly enjoyed, there I go again, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to all your pain and misery, Andy. Nah, thank you so much for sharing everything you've shared. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for giving me so much of your time, and I look forward to staying in touch after this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And genuinely, thank you for having the platform, you know, and inviting people like me on, because that's the only way the message spreads, you know. So I just think I've seen some of your podcasts and they're absolutely brilliant. So yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for the invite.
That's a wrap on today. The video on the screen right now is a former ex-professional footballer who sat down with me and told me all about his gambling addiction. It really is eye-opening. Click that video and I will see you over there.